Thanks for joining us today. We're going to spend a little time today with meeting the experts and thinking about psychological safety. I'd first of all like to introduce you to Professor Walter Epic. Walter is the chairman of our department here at the Sim Centre in RCSI. Walter, can you tell us a little bit about your interest in this topic today, please?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I'm a pediatric emergency doctor and a simulation educator, and spent many years teaching using simulation also in clinical workplaces. And I think one of the underpinning aspects of my educational philosophy is psychological safety, which we'll spend a lot of time talking about. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Walter. And also with us today, we have Dr. Michaela Kloeb. Michaela, can you tell us a little bit about how you're working with simulation and your interest in psychological safety, please?
Thanks, Claire. So I'm the director of the Sim Center here at the University Hospital in Zurich. My background is in psychology, so it's sort of a natural thing that I'm interested in psychological safety on the one hand. And on the other hand, I've noticed it as a faculty that there are certain moments that I don't feel comfortable during teaching or in my own training. And they all, like in hindsight, when I reflect on them, they all have to do with a lack of psychological safety. So for me personally, it really matters how psychologically safe I feel with my co-faculty, for example, Walter and I, we have taught a lot over the last years, and we have I think a shared sense of how to contribute to psychological safety. And that's something that I enjoy very much. So it matters personally a lot to my teaching.
Well, that's such a multi-layered thing then. Psychological safety as a perception of the learners, psychological safety as a perception of the faculty. It's such a multi-layered construct. Wow, very exciting.
Thanks, Walter and Michaela. And my name is Claire. I'm the director of the Simulation Centre here at RCSI. And we're putting podcast series together to help you to work through your own development as a sim educator. So I'm going to start with my first question. And my first question is to our experts. What do you mean when you say psychological safety?
Walter, you want me to start as a psychologist?
I think so. I think so. As a psychologist, that would be great.
Okay. So, I think there's a scholarly definition with psychological safety is sort of the perception of the consequences of taking an interpersonal risk in a given context, in a given work context. So what does that mean? It means when I feel psychologically safe, I feel I can speak my mind. I can try out new things. I can participate in a simulation in front of my peers, in front of my colleagues, with my colleagues, without fearing that I'm being humiliated, I'm being punished, made fun of. Yeah, something like that. So the feeling, I can do whatever I want. I can try out new things. It's okay. Nobody will laugh at me. That's what I think is psychological safety. What do you think, Walter?
Yeah, well, I think that sounds great. And what I would say to extend that a little bit is that psychological safety is this belief that you can take risks, and that may involve feeling uncomfortable. So psychological safety is not about wrapping people up in cotton and making them feel comfortable. It's helping people feel comfortable being uncomfortable. And so, because I think we all know the feeling of taking risks, it's like, can I do it? Can I not do it? You're sort of pushing a boundary, so to speak. And I think in particular, as it relates to clinical education and simulation education in particular, we're designing experiences for the purposes of learning to put people at the edge of their expertise. And in order for people to practice at the edge of their expertise, sort of what's the limit of what they can do, we need them to feel comfortable to take those risks. We don't want people feeling comfortable and just doing what they already know, because we know you learn when you're sort of at that edge. And I think there are a number of things that contribute to that sense of psychological safety, but I really appreciate, Claire, that we're setting a sort of a shared understanding about what psychological safety even is first.
Thanks, Walter, and thanks, Michaela. And exactly, that's the zone of proximal development. I think you're speaking about, Walter, where people learn best just at the edge of their capability and just at the edge of their confidence. And to be able to work just at the edge of your confidence needs all the supports. So the next question I'd like to ask you is, what is a safe learning environment? Walter.
Well, I mean, I think a safe or supportive learning environment is one in which the learners perceive a sense of psychological safety. So they're able to take risks, they're able to make mistakes, and mistakes are not treated in a way that is punitive in any way, and that you adhere to certain principles or ground rules or shared understandings about how to work together. I think there's a number of strategies we'll talk about perhaps in a moment, but as a simulation educator, I'm always very invested in touching on several key things as it relates to supporting a sense of psychological safety, introducing myself, allowing other people to introduce themselves, say something personal, sort of a fun fact, if you will. I often find at the beginning of a simulation session, well before, as the minute people show up, actually, that rapport and connection is vitally important. Establishing some ground rules, including confidentiality, that what happens in simulation stays in simulation. We can take away the learnings, but we don't take away things that are identifiable to a specific person, such as Michaela did this or Michaela said that. And that we talk about, we're not expecting perfection, we're expecting progress. If you were going to be perfect, then we wouldn't need you to come because you would need simulation. So there'll be rough patches in how you do, and then afterwards we'll debrief that and help you get even better. And the other thing that I often highlight, and I'm sure I'm missing some things, Michaela, is that people act differently in simulation than they do in real life. We do our best to make it as real as possible, to make it relevant, and yet it is a simulation. And so people act differently. And I think acknowledging that up front and acknowledging it, sometimes during the debriefing can be really powerful to put people at ease. And I find that I often see people, their shoulders relax when I say that, because they know they're not being judged in a one-to-one way in simulation as in clinical practice. So I'm sure I missed some things, Michaela.
I don't think you missed it. I like the way you framed it. I think what I would add is that psychological safety is something that is happening in our minds. And I think it starts in the minds of the educator, of the facilitator. So I think as simulation educators, we need to step into the shoes of our learners, and especially first-time simulation learners, when they come to the sim center for the first time and they see all this equipment, all these mannequins, all this technical stuff. Then they see the cameras, they see the control room. So it seems so daunting. And I think what we need to do as a facilitator is be aware of, it triggers anxiety, performance anxiety, and that's okay. And we should not contribute to these, to this anxiety. So if we said something along the lines, well, let's see how everybody's doing today. I'm sure you're all well prepared. Then the learners would sort of internally cringe and oh my God, I hope I don't embarrass myself. And we should sort of leave all these verbal jokes and whatever we sometimes do to make people feel uneasy in a funny way. We should sort of leave this out of the simulation education setting. I think, as you said, Walter, it's really being kind, being respectful, acknowledging the variety of challenges the learners come along with. And I think if we do this in our minds as facilitators, the learners will feel this. And it's sort of maybe a major contribution to the safe container. And I think also appreciating, sorry, you go.
No, I think what I was going to do is just add one thing that we learned from our colleague Jenny Rudolph in Boston and her partners there about the basic assumption or this essential premise that we have this belief that people are intelligent, capable, trying their best and want to improve. And I know that holding this basic assumption in the front of your mind is often hard work. And I know it is for me personally. And the reason this basic assumption is so valuable is because it enables us to pose questions and craft experiences that aren't there to make people look bad, but it's there to help people learn. It's really, I think, fundamental to embodying a growth mindset. So rather than having people feel like they're being graded, it's like, hey, I'm going to learn here. I'm getting better at what I do. And I think this basic assumption is one of those fundamental aspects. And generally in the opening part of the session, I will say the basic assumption explicitly as well, and even maybe refer to it as a poster on the wall or those sort of things. So that's a really powerful piece. I mean, if anyone who's interested in learning more about creating what Jenny Rudolph calls a safe container in simulation, I would refer listeners to Jenny's paper, I believe from 2014, about creating a safe container in simulation. That's a really valuable thing, things that you do before the simulation. And I know, Michaela, we collaborated with Adam Chang and Jenny and others on looking at psychological safety during debriefings. And in that particular paper, we talked about strategies, some of which are implicit and others which are more explicit. And I don't know, Claire, if that would suit for us to explore a little bit, those implicit and explicit strategies.
Yes, I think that'd be a great idea, Walter. I really, really like the idea that we're working for not perfect, but progression. So that's the concept that stuck in my mind there from what you've been explaining to us. And what I'd really like to know, in addition to the pre-brief, because we do speak about the pre-brief and we have some slides organized for that, is how to set up the psychological safety environment. So that makes perfect sense to speak about your implicit and explicit methodologies.
Walter, you want to start with the pre-brief and I'll do the explicit?
Well, I mean, in terms of the pre-briefing and creating a safe container, I think I'll just recap what I said earlier, which is sort of establishing ground rules, speaking about the role of mistakes. So these are things I say to people, right? Welcome people, introduce myself, make sure everyone has a chance to go around the room and say who they are and some fun fact about themselves to put them at ease. And generally speaking, people will laugh, and that goes a long way. Being explicit about the role of error, it's saying you're not going to be perfect. If you're going to be perfect, you would need to come here. We make scenarios that are challenging because we know that's where you learn. The other thing is we know that everyone here is, smart and capable and is doing their best and wants to get better at what they do. And this is why in the debriefing, we'll always be very interested in hearing what was going through your mind at various points in time. And our whole purpose here is to get better at what you do. And last but not least, people act differently in simulation and in real life. And I think that's something that's really important just to say to everyone. Those would be the basic things that I include in my pre-briefing. And then of course, depending on the length of the session, how experienced people are in engaging in simulation, I might give more logistical expectations about, what my role is, what their role is, those sort of things. But I think that's really the gist of establishing the supportive environment. And then of course, there's things that you do to maintain that environment. And importantly for me, it's not like you do it once or you say, hey, this is a safe environment. You actually have to believe it when you say it, because safety is not just a word. Safety is a feeling that people have. As you said, Michaela, it's a belief. And so you can't just tell people it's a safe environment. That is wholly insufficient, wholly insufficient.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. So I think that there's never going to be a magic button that we can push and make people feel psychologically safe at any given point, because they may come to a simulation-based training session with, their own experiences. Not all organizations, not all medical schools, nursing schools are very psychologically safe. So people bring their stories with them and their fears and anxieties. And I think what you just said, Walter, the pre-brief is really an important point in time to create the setting to sort of help people feel that safe container. And then I think it really depends on how new the learners are, how the simulation went. When the debriefing starts, I might have to repeat this, and not just once, but maybe twice, because learners may take time to actually trust me, and they have to see me doing this. They have to, for example, be able to share some of their experiences or their struggles within the simulated case, and then see me reacting in a psychologically safe way, sort of taking them seriously, acknowledging them, normalizing their feelings, paraphrasing what I've heard. And these are the things I can do explicitly. I can sort of, use verbal language for that sort of, I'm really curious on what you think, please help me understand. Let's talk about X, Y, and Z. So these are the things that I can say. And in addition to that, I think we convey other things along the way. And these are the more implicit things. Sort of, am I, as a facilitator, am I on time? Do I take the time, as you said, Walter, to talk to them before it actually starts? How do I arrange the room, the debriefing room? The number of chairs. Do I have 20 chairs in a room with the debriefing with just 4 people? It's sort of not that smart. So sort of make it not a nice, it doesn't have to be nice, but sort of an inviting atmosphere where everybody can be more easy. It should be clean. I know it sounds trivial, but sometimes we rush into these educational environments, and in the middle of a debriefing, we feel like uneasy. The room is not well lit. There's no window. So just think about all these sort of wellness factors that really can make a difference in terms of psychological safety. Also, I think it's sort of being authentic. So whenever I listen to you, Walter, I mean, you've been doing this for so many years. I'm always thinking, like, oh my God, I wish I could say it like this. I will never be able to say it like you do. So, and that's probably okay. So, I'll have to find my own words to be authentic and to really mean, as you said, to mean that I'm curious. I hold the learners in high regard. And when I feel that I don't, because, I'm very passionate about a topic, I feel the learners didn't really, they didn't really give their best. I do need my co-faculty, people like you, Walter, and you, Claire, to sort of help me reset myself and be a professional educator. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I think, refer people to our article about managing psychological safety and debriefings, because it is this thing. You don't just establish psychological safety and then it's set. It's a dynamic process, a dynamic and fragile sort of thing. The one thing I'll mention also, I think, especially for listeners who are learning how to debrief, if you invest the time in establishing a supportive learning environment, establishing psychological safety, later on after the simulation and you engage learners in a debriefing and your questions are not perfect, people will be more open rather than viewing it as a critique, and you'll get less defensiveness. This is from experience and also chatting with many simulation educators around the world. So to speak, the learners will cut you more slack. So you don't have to be perfect as a debriefer, but if you invest the time to create psychological safety, they'll be like leaning in and, yeah, that's fine, I'll answer the question, rather than feeling like you're attacking them. So this is why these implicit and explicit things are so important. Learning people's names and those sort of things. It really does go a long way. No one's perfect. And I would say, don't be over hard on yourself, but work on it. And every time you'll become a little bit better and better at establishing and maintaining psychological safety.
I think that's a great point, Walter. And I would add that I think it's even worth investing in your own or in our own psychological safety among our faculty. So I would advise, like, sort of a novice simulation faculty to really invest the time to talk with the operations staff, to talk with co-facilitators, to make yourself sort of establish or to team up and sort of how do you give each other feedback? What are your rules of conduct? To have a coffee together so that, once, and I think this is going to happen eventually, if you're co-debriefing, for example, there will be times of conflict. Walter, you want to talk about X, I want to talk about Z. And then, if we have pre-briefed ourselves, if we are psychologically safe, then we are better among each other, and we are a better role model for the learner. So I think taking the time, as you said, to invest in that is really worthwhile.
Thanks, Michaela.
In your work, you speak about the fact that psychological safety is dynamic and fragile, and it's not really enough to just do your excellent pre-brief and expect then the rest of the session to flow. I guess for me, for somebody that's fairly used to debriefing, but not at the expert stage that you guys would be at, how do you know in a room when psychological safety is broken down? What are the telltale signs that you're just not getting this right?
I'm going to model one.
So nonverbal, yeah, leaning back, yeah.
Leaning back.
I think there's several things. Someone who's quite chatty or conversant and is contributing suddenly isn't. Like a change in behavior, a body language, posture, defensiveness. I think often a thing that speaks to psychological safety and the effectiveness of your pre-briefing when people make excuses for what they did in the simulation, like saying it was because it wasn't real. I think that often is a function of psychological safety that's suboptimal, if you will. And I think it's important to mention that if people disagree with each other, that's not necessarily poor psychological safety. I mean, I think you can hold the safe container and discuss difficult topics. So just because people may have differing points of view, that may be a sign that they're psychological safety because they express the opposing point of view. They feel comfortable saying, Michaela, I'm not sure I see it the same way. And so those would be some things. And I know in the paper, Michaela, we listed a number of different things that speak to threats of psychological safety. And I think when we view threats and psychological safety, then often we need to manage those threats. And I think now we're already getting into sort of more advanced practice, things like naming the dynamic and speaking about things openly. But I think the key message here is it's not set it and forget it. It's create psychological safety, set it and maintain it, actively contribute to it. Be mindful of the things you're doing that may be adding or taking away from perceptions of psychological safety within the group.
I agree, Walter. And I think it's helpful to, when the debriefing is finished, to take a couple of minutes and to, reflect on how the debriefing went. So do a little debriefing of a debriefing if you have the time, even if it's just 2 minutes. I also like, well, I don't like, but I think it's helpful, watching videotapes of debriefings, of my own debriefings. I don't like watching it, to be honest, but in hindsight, it gives me a lot of information, a lot of data on what was happening in the debriefing and how am I doing. I might be doing things unintentionally that contribute to making people feel less safe, as you said, Walter, to, sometimes you feel a sense of resistance in the room, and sometimes we are at loss, we don't know, well, why did that happen? And if we can just rewatch it, could be one way of figuring it out. I think everybody is different. Some people seem to be natural and engaging. They can say almost everything. And for others, it's a little more tricky. And that's okay.
Yeah, we're all on a journey. We're all working at it. No one's perfect. And I think we are trying our best, and our best looks different at different points in time. And I think that realization has been really helpful to me. I'm never going to get it right all the time. And that's okay. But I'm working to get better.
Yeah, and I like the idea, Michaela, you mentioned this earlier on, of working with somebody that can watch you and mentor you and coach you and continue to give you feedback. And I think that's important at whatever stage that we're at, that you have somebody that's kind of watching your back and is prepared and able to give you advice and some tips. So I think we might be near to the end of our time in our discussion. Have I missed anything, or is there anything that you would like to add?
Good.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire.
Well, thank you both for agreeing to contribute to this piece. And we were, as I mentioned earlier, generating a series of topics that will help us on our journey through faculty development. So there will be more in this series to come later on. So all that's left for me to do is to thank you very, very much, Michaela and Walter. Thanks for spending your time with us today.
Thank you so much.
Claire.